Hello all, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video, I'm going to talk to you about what is the difference between a professor and a doctor. So I'm really talking about an MD in this case. So if you don't know me, I am a professor of information strategy and entrepreneurship. That was really weird. I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I wanted to pay the favor for it and help you out as much as I possibly can. All right, so the reason why I'm stumbling there is what I'm trying to point out. If you're trying to watch this video to find out what the difference between a doctor and a professor is, really depends on the role. So, more of a doctor means you just have your PhD, your doctorate. And a professor means that you're employed at a university doing a particular thing as a professor at a university. It's sort of a real designation that you get. But what I'm talking about in this video is the difference between a professor and an MD, a medical doctor, right? So that's an important thing to think about with this, is that there is a lot of similarities between becoming a professor and becoming an MD, but there's lots of differences as well, and I'd like to sort of point those out, right? In terms of the similarities between being a professor and a doctor, we went to school, both of us went to school for a long time, right? So if you're super fast in med school and you get your MD really, really quickly, you can probably get it in 7 or 8 years. That means that you worked crazy hours and you went and got higher education, very, very quickly, that you went through the whole process extremely fast. My wife, who's in veterinary medicine, she went through very quickly. I think she did 7 years. We worked really hard when we were both in school at the same time, right? So you can go and get these things very, very quickly, and you could be totally fine. But most people, I think most, people that go the MD route and sort of do that particular domain, will take longer, and that's not unusual, right? Because you get your undergrad and then you get your master's. You might put in a couple of years of just kind of working to get your foot in the door kind of thing, and then you go and apply for med school. Really normal to do that kind of stuff as well. But for professors, most of us went to school for at least 10 years, at least in the higher education. I went for 12. Not unusual to do this, right? So you got your undergrad, then you got your master's, and then you do your PhD, and then postdocs and all that kind of stuff. Totally normal. And you can imagine the more equivalent of a professor, I think, is not necessarily an MD, but it's more of the specialist in that domain, right? So specialists like a neurosurgeon, they'll go to school for, 15, 20 years, right? For a long time. And that's because they got all these different residencies, and they have to go get, not only MD, but then all these other designations. It's the same thing that happens when you do a sort of professor research route, where you are building up a case for the thing that you're working on. That's what postdocs are really about. They're kind of like residencies, where you go and you sort of build up competence in a particular area before you go on and do something else, right, in that particular domain. The second thing I wanted to point out is that we come in all shapes and sizes. And I don't think that there is, that there are demographic biases or demographic slants, I guess, in terms of, who goes into particular careers and whatnot. But for example, at universities, unfortunately, there is a real bias towards, in terms of professors that are tenured, there is a real bias towards, white males that are tenured. And I'm not sort of suggesting that, it's discriminatory or anything like that, but there's like underlying factors behind that are far more complicated than sort of just raising that and simply looking at that. And a lot of it has to do with sort of the structure of how things are done, and sort of the process that are done. And it's the same thing in sort of medical fields as well. As if you get an MD, really cool researcher that's doing amazing research. Well, actually, I don't know her, but she does great research, Catherine Kellogg, that has sort of documented this in terms of this transition between sort of social classes or way how people are dealing with these things in medical school, because there is a real change in how we deal sort of structurally. She's a sociologist, I believe that's what her training is, but looking at it sort of structurally, it is a really kind of weird thing, because the way that society was set up for many years, that there was men went off to work, and then they would, especially in med school, right? That was kind of like the big thing. She actually has a name for it. It's called Iron Men. I've talked about this a few times, and I just love it. Where you're just like really hardcore and you work really crazy hours, and then you, once you build this sort of structure, you want to defend that turf as well, right? So, and it's not necessarily like a bias in any sort of way. It's just that you thought it was so hard to get in that everybody else should go through the same experiences, right? So your residents should be crazy as well. And then the same thing for females, right? So if they get in and they become a female specialist in a particular domain, they're going to want to do the exact same thing and probably even defend it a little bit more. So the whole process is structurally a lot more complicated. Although if you look at the demographics, there is slight sort of trends in certain ways, but this is changing, right? So the demographics, just like how the economy is changing demographically across not only the United States, across the world, we're becoming a lot more global, except for the last couple of years. It's been weird with what's happening with sort of the political game and things like. I'm not going to get into that, but generally very weird that's happening right now. Most of trends for a very long time in the last 70 years is that we're becoming more diverse, and we're becoming much more interdependent between all sorts of demographics and all sorts of sort of shapes and sizes. And so you'd expect that to happen in universities and as well as hospitals, right? So you're going to get the same sort of thing, or clinics, where you get people of all shapes and sizes that people are going in and working, shape and just all sorts of demographics, and that is totally normal. And you're going to see that in university, and you're going to see that in in medical school as well, because there should be, all else equal, it should be just dependent on your merit, and that's what ultimately we should be looking at. But it's going off into a direct tangent that I didn't want to go into, but merit is a complicated thing, because we have to look at the sort of structural changes and understand where merit actually comes from and how we define what merit is and stuff. It's really complicated, so I didn't want to go into that direction, but just know people from all shapes and sizes go into both domains, and it's normal to go into those particular domains, right? So the same thing in terms of pay that I've mentioned before in this channel is that, the highest paying professors and the highest paying doctors do very well, right? I think, though, that there is a more clustering in terms of what, doctors make than there is in terms of what professors make. There's a more variance between what people make as professors than there is, because some of the lowest paid professors don't make a lot of money. I really don't. Like, you should look at some of them. They're really not that, you're $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Really tough to sort of get by on those salaries. And the highest paying ones, if you were the best and you were at, Harvard Business School, and everybody knows who you are and you're internationally recognized, you're going to be making a lot. A lot. And for everybody, it's going to be considered that's a lot of money. So just have that in mind, right? But for physicians, and a lot of this has to do with sort of lobbying behavior that happens, right? And the sort of political structure and the political economy behind the different careers. And again, I didn't want to go into this direction, but what you have to look at is that the medical profession has really strong lobbyists. They have the American Medical Association, for example, in the United States, that has very strong political power that allows them to to not only, control the selection mechanism of people that are getting into the program, right? So it's really hard to get into med school at most places, right? Really, really tough to get into med school. But also, as well, is they try to do things to keep the profession, keep the supply, not only supply low for, physicians, but as well as, have the demand extremely high. So prices go up or wages go up for, physicians, and then they're able to control this a little bit more than, for professors. It's not really a union. There are unions for professors. I'm not discounting them, but it's not as strong as American Medical Association in terms of the behavior that they're doing, the political economy behind it. So just keep that in mind. The other thing, so what we tend to do in terms of the careers, professors and MDs, both try to generalize knowledge, right? So professors will look for novelty and look for things that are weird, but MDs have to look at what general knowledge is and then apply it to novel situations, right? So everybody is different. When physicians deal with, this is where the art of being a physician is, right? Where everybody's absolutely different. We all have different shapes and sizes. Some people are really big, some people are really small, some people have different, heredities and stuff like that are difficult to pick up with generalized knowledge. And this is where personalized medicine is coming from, right? There's a new sort of transition towards that. But what it is that they're trying to generalize into all these different domains that are really difficult to sort of generalize into. And what professors tend to do is we look and we say, well, that's unique and different. Let's try to generalize from that unique and different thing and try to write something up about it, right? So what's the difference between a professor and a doctor? Most MDs in general, once you become an MD, like a general practitioner MD, is that you're probably never going to teach, and that is okay. However, MDs, if they want to grow their practice and do really well in their practice, they have to read research and as well as lead their practice, right? So they have to grow their practice and become much more like a manager and a small business owner than, in terms of a physician. So MDs are kind of in this weird role, a lot of them are, where they're both, managers of a small company, a small organization, and then as well as they're sort of doing their professional role. And so you can see sometimes they'll sort of do specializing where they'll just sort of manage their small business that they have, small business being anything less than 250 people. And then, so most physicians' offices are going to be under, classified as a small business. And then after that, they can sort of specialize and manage that whole process. Or what a lot of people do, you see this a lot of practices, is they try to do both, where they're both a practitioner and as well as a manager. It ends up being a little tougher to do that, and I think you don't do either as well. But at the same time, that's kind of like what the norm is, right? So that's the tricky thing. But whereas professors, we are employees of a university, so our roles and how we do things are a little different. MDs can also be professors too, if you didn't know that. That's normal as well. They're just maybe they teach or they do research for a university. A lot of research universities do this in terms of, being at a teaching hospital, for example. Totally normal. I think that MDs work in a much more faster-paced work environment than what professors do. It's still really, we have a lot of, still quick with the things that we do as professors, but the sort of pace at which things go every day is really quick in terms of an MD, where they're seeing 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 clients a day, where they're just trying to get through as many clients as they can. And that just makes the day go really, really quick. They're just doing things very, very quickly. Whereas, professors, we have to work on something that's long-term, drawn out, and we try to do things, but it's just that it creates a different dynamic where we just don't have that sort of time crunch and that time where we feel like we're always rushed all the time. And, we do feel like that way, but it's just not the same, right? The feedback loop is not as quick with it, right? And so that's all I wanted to say with that. It's a little bit more complicated in terms of feedback loops with physicians because they never see what the outcomes are when they help somebody. But it's tricky that way. So that's all I wanted to talk about. Really, what there is I want to point out that there's a lot of similarities between an MD and a professor, but at the same time, there's lots of real big differences between them, and you should just be well aware of that before you go into those careers, and hopefully that's going to help you out in terms of understanding what this is. So give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Take care, and have a wonderful day. Bye.